Hey, y'all. Happy Monday. It is good to be alive today. The sun is shining. I hope it is nice and sunny where you all are. We move the clock forward, so it's nice outside. Well, it's daylight, I should say. I don't know where you are. Hopefully, it is nice because spring is upon us. Welcome. This is what are your thoughts, right? So, this is a time for me to share some information, some articles that I read, and some data that I look up to spark conversation and some thinking. So, hey, courageous school leaders, it's Dr. D here, right? Um, so, if you don't know who I am, my passion is to empower urban school leaders to lead with confidence so that they can completely shift their instructional culture and feel affirmed in the work that they do. So, in the work that I do with coaching and consulting, I'm finding that school leaders are finding the challenge of getting staff to be on the same page that they are on in terms of this passion and this urgency behind the work. And I believe that we have the power to change that, right? Like to put systems in place and reflect more so that we can do the work that's necessary to move our marginalized students out of this gap that they are in. And so I believe, as Margaret Wheatley says all the time, you have to be brave enough to have the conversations, start the conversations that matter. And I add on to that you have to be courageous enough, right, to create the disruption that's needed, and that starts with conversation, collective minds coming together. And so that's the purpose of us coming together, and that's the purpose of my work, right? And so the goal for this 30 minutes is for me to share some either some current issues that are going on with some data and maybe some opinion articles um, and connected to data so that as a leader you can begin to shift your data lens so that you are thinking and walking in that way. So let's get to it because our time is short. So there was an article an opinion article um, around why leaders need to develop their own growth mindset, right? And uh, a growth mindset is a coin like a term that was coined by Carol Dweck back in 2006. She uh, wrote a book that I even used with my staff and my students at the middle school and taught them about, like that was a part of our culture is that this idea around growth mindset and pushing through and pushing, like not seeing things as final and stagnant, but always pushing through and thinking with the glass half full and putting the actions in place to do that. And it's actually a process, right? And I really like this article because it talked about how it's not just about effort, it's about what you're doing um, as a practice, like making it something that you are intentionally working on. And so this is a question that I pose to you because the mindset piece really works. Like they mention about the what's his name? Oh my goodness, who wrote Instructional Rounds? Elmore speaks about these principles that school leaders can use to help them practice mindset. And what I noticed is that there's a common thread with all of these principles. And I'll lift that up as I go through that some more. So as I'm talking, feel free to put comments in the chat and so I can respond as we move along. So let's get into it. So if there were clear actionable steps to lead more effectively in like this really complex world of educational leadership, of school leadership, would you be eager to implement them? I mean, that's a rhetorical question. Of course you would, right? So how can we as committed leaders like embody these principles that are mentioned in this article? And the principles are here. I don't know if you can see it as big on the screen, but the principles are here, right? So let's dive into how we can use these principles. And what I want to do is just provide like one action step that can be used to begin working with these principles. And what you'll notice too with these principles is that this is not anything new. This has been stated in different ways and in other things that I have shared and talked about before to kind of show that there are parallels between what this opinion is stating, and other things that have been stated by other people, right? Like other researchers, DeWitt and Prasad and Wang, right? Um, so let's look at the first one. The first one says, as a principle, um, it says Elmo goes on to offer four principles to improve school leadership, and those principles are: the first one, everyone should be anchored in the instructional core of schooling, right? Well, yeah, that's why we're there as educational leaders, right? Our priority is to move our students' instruction, to make sure that the gaps are closed and that they don't fall in gaps, right? That is the core. That is why we're there in the first place. All the other things that happen, we have to attend to: community, resources, all of those other things that come into play only because our goal is instructional leadership, is to move instruction, right? And so, um, let me run through them all and then give an example of how to start this work. The second principle is systemic problems require systemic solutions. Absolutely, right? There has to be a step-by-step process in on how to address the challenges that we're having, right? It has to be codified. It takes time. It's not just a one and done. It's you need to do this first and then this first. And I know, as a school leader, very often I would be like, well, I just did it. But no, I didn't just do it. There was a process that was used in order to address any challenges that we had in our building. Principle three: professionals, professions have practices. Educational leadership is a profession without a practice. I'm going to read that one again. Professions have practices. Educational leadership is a profession without a practice. This is so true. And this is what I'm hearing from a lot of school leaders that I meet at conferences, that I coach, that I consult with, that the reason why they are seeking coaching is because there is no professional practice going on in their district. But as a school leader, you can take control of that. Like, you don't have to wait for the district to create this professional practice for you, right? So I'm gonna talk about that a little more in a second. And then the fourth principle that Elmore talks about that school leaders need to begin practicing, is powerful practice requires strategies. It's a list. It's not a list is not a strategy, right? Like, a lot of times we get caught up and we have to do this and then in this verse and that verse and this second, but there are ways to go about addressing a strategy where you're not just, it feels like compliance when you're just checking in things off a list that you've done those things. There is data that's required, right? That's part of a strategy. A list has no data, no way to check, but a strategy does, right? And so let's talk about that a little more. Let's go to this first one. Everything should be anchored in the instructional core of schooling, right? So, for example, Elmore has a book, Instructional Rounds, which I absolutely love. It is very specific examples on how to begin instructional rounds effectively in your building. So, pick a classroom or a lesson that you want to observe with your leadership team. And the goal here is to engage directly with the teaching and learning process. What does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like in the room? Is the teacher meeting the target? Are the students, how engaged are students? Is the target meeting the learning standard, right? Like, after you do that with your team, you're not doing it alone, right? You and your leadership team come together afterward and you reflect on what you observed, discussing how it connects to the school's broader instructional goals. The why. What are your goals? Your why is connected to your instructional goals. When you go in and you're doing these classroom deep dives, which are really instructional rounds in his book, it connects to that. If it's not connected to the instructional goals, then there's a conversation and some support that needs to be had on how you could support this teacher in shifting that instruction so that it's meeting your school's goals. That's data. Okay. This practice not only keeps like the core at the center of all of the decisions that you make, but it also encourages like a culture of openness and continuous improvement. Okay. These walkthroughs, this is the data. Okay. So that's one, the principle. Everything should be anchored in the instructional course. So you and your team need to go in together because you have to create the same lens together. Because one person on the team can go in and see something totally different than the second person on your instructional leadership team. But you all need to go in together so that you can debrief on what you saw and then does it align to your instructional goals as a school? That's one. The second thing, systemic problems require systemic solutions. So this requires like a couple of steps. So one is identifying the challenge. What is the systemic challenge that your school is facing, right? And then you come together to talk about it. Bring your stakeholders together. You need your teachers, you need students, you need parents, you need staff. Again, you are not doing this alone. So once you identify it, you bring your stakeholders together. And then you map out how this challenge affects the different aspects of your school. How does it affect the classroom? Does it affect lunch? Does it affect dismissal? Does it affect the behaviors? Does it affect, you know, like that's what you're talking about. And that's why you need all the stakeholders together so that you can hear the different perspectives of people because everyone in the same problem will see differently and have different perspectives. So you need those collective voices. So this collaboration really helps ensure that you're crafting solutions that address the root of the systemic issue rather than a quick fix that will not hold up over time, right? So that's like a success map. Like, how are you mapping out how you're going to address this systemic challenge? And bringing everybody together, what is that? Data. That is data. Okay. Again, data lives everywhere in your building. So for step two, systemic problems require systemic solutions. Identify what's the systemic problem. Then bring your stakeholders together and then map out how that problem is affecting different aspects of the school. You're not really asking them for solutions, but you're asking them about how it affects the school. You can talk about solutions. That's important, right? Because hearing everyone's voice is really important. Um, but how it affects different aspects of each person like each stakeholder is really critical. So that's principle two. Principle three, professions have practices. You talk about practice? Yeah, we talk about practice. Professions have practices. Educational leadership is a profession without a practice. Yeah, you have the power to stop that leader. And this is one of the reasons why I always address you as courageous leaders, because this is the point where you are taking the reins of your own learning. So once a month, right? You have colleagues that you see all the time. Call up one or two or three and have the conversation where you invite, each other to come together and like share some strategies that are working. Why wait for the district to do that? Like you can take the lead on this yourself, right? When school leaders come together, I found that my learning was so much more effective and long lasting when I had the time and space to connect and converse with my colleagues. Like, oh, okay, I'll try this way next time. Or I didn't think about it that way. Let me go back to the drawing board and speak to my team and try this. So grab about two or three colleagues, start small, come together once a month, maybe a Zoom call or however you want to get together, and talk about the things that are working effectively in your buildings and how you know it's working effectively. There's the data, right? This space should encourage you all experimenting, right? And this also connects to the de-implementation that I referenced last week, like this whole decluttering process, like that remove the practices that have zero to little impact. And you coming together with your colleagues would allow for you to kind of talk about the things that are working effectively. What new approaches could you use? You're sharing successes and failures and providing feedback to one another, right? The feedback that you won't get from your supervisor from the district, right? And so when by treating like leadership as a practice, that's a practice. You're all coming together, right? You can develop and refine your leadership skills. You create a community. And I guarantee you, if you call 2 or 3 people in your leadership circle in your district, other people hear about it, they're going to want to join in. They're going to want to join in. And your goal should be to invite as many as possible because collective minds is what makes the shift and the change, right? So you create a community of professionals that are dedicated to growing and learning together, right? So build like a leadership lab, like a practice lab. Okay. One of the things I do want to say here too is like, don't take things personally in this leadership lab. It's a space where you're creating um, open and honest feedback and reflection, positivity, experimenting. Like, oh well, that's not going to work. That I don't want to do this part because it's not going to work really well for my kids because of X, Y, and Z. Right. And when you are talking with your group, your leadership lab, like your group of um, other school leaders in this circle of practice, when you are sharing things that are not working, you're also talking about data. Because now, when you see like you and four other colleagues of yours, school leaders, are seeing the same thing about an initiative that the district rolled out is not having the impact that it needs to, you get rid of it, the implementation, but you also replace it with something that will work. That's your data, right? And that's how you all are talking to each other around like, okay, if we remove this, then what are we going to put in to replace it? And how do we know that it's going to work? Okay, so let's try it and come back together next month and see if we see any progress, right? And so now you have data that you can show and talk to with your supervisor from the district and even say, look, the 4 of us are seeing the same kind of progress using this strategy for teaching and learning. And so we want to keep on this momentum. Trust me, the district just wants to see your numbers move. Okay. So that's 3. Principle 4, powerful practice requires strategies. A list is not a strategy. So let's say, for example, you identify one area for improvement in your school, like one area that can have a significant impact on your on like student learning, right? And it could be something like um, providing before school tutoring, um, or ensuring that students are having breakfast. So trying to get more kids to come to breakfast before they go to class, right? Um, Instead of creating a laundry list of actions, for example, send out flyers about breakfast, create an incentive for students to come to breakfast, um, notify parents about the incentive, those kinds of things. Instead of creating a list of things to do, again, this whole de-implementation has little to no impact. You get rid of it or you don't do it. You develop like a strategic plan that clearly outlines the vision. Why do you want kids to come in for breakfast? Right? What is the vision for that? You want kids to come in for breakfast because research shows that when kids come to school and have a full meal and are they and come to school in enough time where they're not rushing into class when the bell rings, that they're more focused in school. They have a full belly and they're not feeling the anxiety from the rush, right? That's proven. That's research proven. Okay? So your vision is based on some data that you know is really going to make a difference with your school. And then you have specific objectives. What do you want? Like, what is your objective for this? What are the things that you want to see that is going to happen at the end of this initiative for this breakfast initiative, right? Set a timeline. We're going to run this initiative from the beginning, first week in October, all the way to Thanksgiving. And then set benchmarks. This is your data. How many kids have we increased our breakfast attendance at breakfast? Have we seen a difference in students' performance in class because they come in early enough to go to breakfast and go to and sit in class, right? So this is something that you have to engage your entire team in this planning process. It's not just the list, it is a strategic plan. What's the vision? What are the objectives? What's the timeline? How's it going to be measured? Data, data, data. Always data. It's everywhere, right? And so having this sense of clarity, right? Because I talk a lot about clarity and confidence. Having this sense of clarity really like and clarity of purpose is lets everyone know, like informs your school community that this approach is really concentrated and it's aligned on like making a difference in that principle one, which is anchored in instruction, right? So the thing that all four of these have is that the community is involved with it. You're not, as a school leader, you're not doing these things alone. That is critical to understand. Okay. And just think about the wonderful the impact that it has when you are sharing these practices with other people, how much you benefit from it. Okay. So four things to shift the mindset. And before I go into the four things and rewind those things, I want to mention something, show you something in this article here that since Carol Dweck's book, originally in 2006, there were some misconceptions about what um, growth mindset really is, right? And so I want to highlight this point here where she says a growth mindset is not just about effort, right? It's the most common misconception, equating the growth mindset with effort. She says, certainly, effort is key for students' achievement, but it's not the only thing. Students need to try new strategies and seek input from others when they are stuck. They need this repertoire of approaches, not just sheer effort to learn and improve. And so when we equate that to school leaders, because that's what this article is about, school leaders is it takes collective effort. Not just effort though, but like practice, which is why that third principle is really like it really hits home for that third principle, which is professions have practices, but educational leadership is a profession without a practice. So it takes intention and it takes practice. And so just to recap, principle one, everything should be anchored in instructional four. Pick a classroom with your leadership team, go in and talk about the instruction that you see, norm on what you're seeing, and then talk about if that instruction aligns with the instructional goals of the school. Principle two, systemic problems require systemic solutions. First identify what's the systemic challenge. You and your team can do that. And then you bring all of your stakeholders together, teachers, parents, students, and then you map out how that systemic challenge is impacting different parts of the school. Okay. to work on a collaborative approach to address the systemic issue and get to the root. The third principle, which is professions have practices, educational leadership is a profession without a practice. This is where you need to be courageous and reach out to some colleagues. Talk about getting together once a month and create a space where you're encouraging each other and experimenting on things that are working, share things that are not working, give each other feedback, right? Create this circle of practice that is so needed. And then the last one, the last principle that Elmore talks about for leader mindset and how to be intentional to shift that is powerful practices require strategies. A list is not a strategy. And so one way you can do that is focus on one area that you want to have that has a significant impact on learning. And instead of creating a list of things to do, develop a strategic plan that has a vision, an objective, a timeline, and how's it going to be measured. Okay. All communities of practice. Like your leadership team is included in this, your families are included in it, your colleagues are included in some of these methods to practice a growth mindset, right? And so by taking these steps, we not only model for our, like model the principles um, we stand for, but we're also leading by example in creating like this environment that, every member of your school community feels like really empowered to contribute to the success of the school. And when your staff feel like they are active contributors to the success of the school, that shift that is needed, where I'm hearing a lot of school leaders talk about, like, how do I get my staff to buy in and to be like committed again? It comes from that too. When you're including them in the decision making process, right? They feel empowered to make these decisions collectively. So, just something to think about. Um, I really want to reiterate how important, or hopefully that you can see how data is included in all of these principles, and in some of the ways that I shared, that you can actually use this and begin to introduce these steps to your leadership team and as a part of your leadership practice. So thank you for hopping on. If you did, if you're watching the replay, thank you so much. Please watch it and put some comments in there and I'll respond. I really appreciate you taking the time to take a look at this. And I will see you next Monday. Yeah, next Monday for the next What Are Your Thoughts? Have a fantastic week, everyone.